All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Goen, and I am your host today for CVCA's Let's Chat Pro Tips for Your AT Grant session. We are so excited to be welcoming you all to our second community of practice, and I'm excited to share a little bit more about who we are, as well as what you can expect to hear today. All right, so if you are here for the first time, I want to introduce you to who CVCA is. The Coalition for Victims of Child Abuse is your network of support. It's a partnership that was established between Cal OES and the Child Abuse Prevention Center in 2016. So this is our 5th year of supporting AT-SIP recipients. The ways that we're able to do this is by delivering resources, training, and technical assistance, such as this group that we're hosting today. CVCA is led by and driven by the steering direction that our advisory committee provides. And that group is made up of myself, Nicole Holm, who's on this call today too, as well as first time and experienced chat recipients. So we're so excited to be offering today's session as a continuation of a conversation that started at our last meeting. And I'm very proud to say that we have 43 AT-SIP recipients represented on this call today, 43 out of 61. So we're so excited for you to tap into your network of support, to be able to hear some technical information related to your grant from Nicole, as well as to learn from each other about what you're seeing in the field, what are some of your priorities, as well as challenges that you're tackling. So as mentioned today, we have Nicole Holm with us on. She's the Children's Unit Chief, as well as her Program Specialist team. So I know that many of you received this invitation from them. Thank you so much to all of you for your support in sharing this opportunity and being here as support today. So I want to briefly cover our agenda. So first, you're going to be hearing a presentation from Nicole Holm just about some of the incoming questions that I received in the registration process. So that'll be an opportunity for all your questions to be covered. And if anything was missed or if anything comes up, please feel free to ask questions at that time. Next, we're going to be engaging in some shared learning. We have some breakout groups that are going to be arranged with Jamboards, just so that you'll be able to further develop those relationships with AT-SIP recipients, as well as learn from others' experiences about certain topics such as family engagement, what strategies are working for recruitment, as well as more program management level questions and interests. And then finally, we're going to be closing out with Save the Date, as well as a few announcements about what you can expect next from us. So without further ado, I'm going to be turning it over to Nicole to share her slide deck.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I'm so impressed with the turnout. Thank you so much for your interest. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to provide information to you about your child abuse treatment program. Joining me today is my team, and I would like to introduce each of them. And to my team, because we can't see everybody, if you could turn on your camera and unmute yourselves and say hi so that everybody can see you when I say your name, I would appreciate that. Thank you. So joining me today from my team is Samantha Clay. You may know her as Sam.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam. Pleasure to meet you all or see you all again.
Thank you. Also, I have Dennis Hall joining us today.
Sorry.
Oh, sounds like Dennis is having some technical difficulties. He actually does not look like the state of California. He's an actual person. Good morning, Dennis. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm sorry you're having technical difficulties. We also have Lance Stark, who is joining us this morning.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here and participate in this with you all.
Good morning. We also have Brittany Clark with us this morning.
Hello, nice to see everyone.
Thank you. And we have Tara Cushman with us this morning.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if Nikisha has joined us this morning.
I'm here.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning,
Nikisha
everyone.
has joined us as well. So I just want to let everybody know that both Nikisha and Tara have been activated. As you are probably aware, Cal OES is where we have the State Operations Center, and Nikisha is helping out in the State Operations Center. And then we also have our joint field office, and Tara has actually a 2-month stint in the joint field office. So they were able to join for the very first part of our day this morning. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to all of my team for being here today. So I just wanted all of you to get to know my team. They are fantastic if you have not already figured that out yourselves. They are here to help you. They're incredibly helpful, incredibly knowledgeable, and I just want all of you to feel comfortable contacting them for anything at any time. So thank you all for joining us today. I want to also thank those of you who submitted questions in advance of our meeting today. Today's meeting is intended for me to be able to provide programmatic information to you, and then you will also be able to share information amongst yourselves. And I think this is really important as we figure out how we're going to spend all of those funds and maybe improve the services that you are providing to child victims. So I want you to please feel free to ask questions as we go along. And we are going to start off today by answering the questions that you submitted in advance. If you have questions as we go along, please feel free to ask, and I am happy to answer those. So we are going to go ahead and get started. I will share my screen with all of you in just a moment. Okay. Okay, so everybody should see a PowerPoint presentation. Yes, okay, perfect. All right, so before I answer the questions that you had submitted, I just wanted to give you a few reminders about your current program, the AT20 program, and then your upcoming program for AT21. So just a quick reminder about AT20 is that it ends in December 31st. And during the liquidation period, you are going to have an opportunity to review your expenditures and ensure you have claimed all of your funds. If you need to do a budget modification, that will have to be submitted by February 15th. My team will send you a reminder for that date. And the reason we need to have that by that date is we need to have the time to process your modification and get it fully approved in time for you to submit your final 201 to us, which will be due March 1st of 2022. So those are some really important dates we need to make sure that you adhere to. Again, my team will send you some gentle reminders about those dates as we get closer. And then for the upcoming AT21, that starts January 1st. Those applications have been received. My team is reviewing those or has reviewed all of them. Many of them have been turned into me for review and approval. Many of them are already in award. The goal is to have all of you in award by January 1st, which means you will receive your grant subaward approval notification before January. So it's really important to remember that you cannot, so you'll be an award, however, you cannot start claiming funds for AT21 until after January. So during that time period, you will have to continue to submit your 201s for the AT20 program. So on this slide, I also have the fund sources for AT21, but in a slide further on, I'm actually going to address these fund sources in more detail because they were actually the subject of one of your questions. So can I answer any questions before we move on to answering the questions that you submitted in advance of the meeting? No questions. Okay. So we're going to get started with the questions that were submitted. So one of the questions was, what is new for the AT program and have there been any changes over the years? So not a lot has changed for the AT program in terms of the objectives for the program. We have definitely scaled down the RFP and the RFA to make it more succinct. So for those of you who are familiar with prior RFPs and RFAs for this program, you probably noticed that it is a lot shorter, but we did not change the intent of the program. Now, there have been two changes in terms of what is allowed through the program, and I have those on this slide. Number one was removing the caveat that therapy, including non-offending family members, was removed. So in prior versions of the RFP and prior versions of the RFA, it was very specific, stating that family therapy may include non-offending family members. Well, we realize that the child may still be in the presence of the offender, and that person may need to be included in therapy when possible, so they can understand how their actions have caused trauma, and then also help them with the recovery of that child. And for those of you who were fortunate enough to attend Lucky's presentation, you will know that this was addressed in that presentation as well. And then the other change was actually a more recent change, thanks to the pandemic. We had previously stated that therapy had to take place in the clinic unless prior approval was provided by Cal OES. So as you're well aware, in order to be able to continue to provide therapy during the initial stay-at-home order, many of you started to use a virtual platform to provide those services. And that is something that we continue to allow. And at this point, we are really just leaving it up to you, the experts, to deliver services in a way that is most comfortable for you and for your clients. So those are really the only changes that have been made to the AT program. Any questions before I move on to the next question that had been submitted?
Yes, we did receive one from Selena who asks, who defines offending family members?
I mean, it would be whoever was the source of the abuse or the victimization of that child, and it would be anybody within that household or anybody that they are subjected to within the household. So caregiver, family member. Does that answer the question?
I have another question.
Sure.
And that only applies for family therapy, you said, right? Like we're doing, maybe working with the child, and then we want to move on to do like family therapy, and we want to include that person as part of the healing of the child.
Yes, so I actually do address this in on another slide, but I will touch on that now. If you are providing their family therapy and you realize that that caregiver, that family member needs therapy to address their own trauma, that is not the intent of this program. So all family therapy needs to center around the child's healing. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? All right. Oh, yes.
We do have one from Patricia who asks, in addition to virtual service delivery, are we allowed to do home visits as needed by the families?
Yes, that is fine as well. We're really being flexible with that at this point. You know, you obviously you are the experts. You know what is going to be best for your staff and that child. And we realize that each child is going to have a different circumstance. And so the objective is to ensure that they are getting those therapeutic services and that it is sustainable for them. We don't want to have any barriers to them getting those services. So whatever is safest and whatever is going to be able to sustain that therapy plan for your child victim. Any other questions? All right. The next question was, what are the best practices for maximizing funds? Well, thank you so much for asking this. This is such an important topic because we need to be able to show the feds that there is a need for this money. And the best way to show that need is by spending the money. And so it is our goal to not return the money. Our fund sources, so for VOCA, through the Office for Victims of Crime, when we receive that award, that money is available to us for 3 years to allocate to our programs. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later as well. But within that 3 years, it is our goal to use all of that money, just like we're asking you to use all of your money within 1 year. So the best way to ensure that you are spending your funds is to make sure, number one, that you are submitting your report of expenditures and requests to funds, also known by its form number, the 201, on time. If you are a non-governmental agency, that means you need to submit your 201 each month within 30 days following the end of the reporting period. So October is due at the end of this month. And if you are a governmental agency, you submit quarterly. And again, that is within 30 days following the end of the reporting period. So third quarter was actually due at the end of October. So that's the first thing you can do. It's much easier to monitor your spending if you're submitting your 201s on time. The second thing is using your budget summary report to track your spending. The submission of your 201s will appear on your budget summary report, and this is going to tell you how your 201 was applied and let you know what your balance is and in what category. So this is an opportunity for you to identify if you have a surplus of funds in a budget category, or even if there's a discrepancy between what we have in our ledger and what you have. If there, and those discrepancies do happen. You may think that you have less funds available than what you actually have. And one way to mitigate that is by looking at your budget summary report to make sure that your records match our records. And if they don't, then you need to contact your program specialist right away so that they can help you resolve that discrepancy and then get you back on track with your spending. And then on the next slide, I'm actually going to share with you an example of a budget summary report, and I'll cover that in a little more detail. I love the budget summary report. I'm just going to put that out there. It's my favorite. So I'm going to nerd out over it a little bit, just a little warning. Now, in the event that you find that you do have a surplus in a budget category, you may complete a budget modification to move funds to help you maximize your spending. We know that at the time that you put your budget together to go with your application, you are doing your best guess estimate of what your expenditures will be. But as you know, that changes. It either changes right away or it changes throughout your performance period. You may have a hard time hiring some of the positions that you had budgeted for, or there are situations where staff leaves or they're on an extended absence and that causes a surplus of funds. And so you can use a budget modification to pay somebody more if they're spending more time on the grant, or move that over to operating if you have some operating expenses you need to cover. And 2 slides from now, I'm also going to talk a little bit more about a budget modification in a little more detail. And then of course, this is going to be a common theme throughout. If you need any assistance, or if you have some ideas for spending and you're just not sure if it would be allowable, please contact your program specialist. They are going to be very instrumental in helping you stay on track with your spending, telling you what's allowable, and telling you what's needed in order to spend down those funds. All right, you guys ready to see my favorite report? Okay, so this is an example of a budget summary report. This is a very, very important tool. It's an important tool throughout your performance period. It's also really important as we are in the liquidation period and finalizing your grant subaward. You should be getting these each month, right around the time that your 201 is approved, and reviewing them. This is going to help you determine what you have left to claim and in what category you have that money to claim. So as I said, this is an example of what we have. This is for an actual AT program. So the fund sources should look very familiar to you. Of course, yours will be in different categories and different amounts by expenditures. And you will see here that we have all 3 budget categories. We have personal services, operating, and equipment. Those will always appear on your budget summary report. Now, the amounts that you see in the budget amount, which is outlined in orange on this slide, are based on either the original budget that you submit with your application, or if you have submitted a modification or multiple modifications, it represents the amount of your most recent modification. The paid expended amounts, which is outlined in purple, are what we show that has been paid to you based on the 201s that you have submitted. If you have a payment pending, that will be in the pending column. And then finally, the pending balance, which is outlined in green, is what is available to you once all payments have been made. And I have a tendency to focus on that column when I am looking at expenditures for each of your subawards. Again, it's a very helpful tool because it gives you a snapshot of what your expenditures are and what is remaining. And this is always going to be very helpful as you are working on a final 201. And then you are going to need the budget summary report for a couple of reasons when you complete your budget modification. Now, again, your program specialist should be sending this to you regularly, but you can request one at any time. So just call or send an email to your program specialist, ask for a budget modification, and they can send that over to you. And the reason you would need this is even if you're not moving funds, you need to make sure that your budget totals match the allocations in that budget amount column. Again, the one that is highlighted with the orange box, because that is always going to be your starting point. Or if you are moving funds, again, this has to be your starting point for your modification for your current allocation, so that when you subtract, you have the correct new allocation. And then, of course, if you are moving funds, you will need to refer to the pending balance column so that you know what you have available to move from one budget category to another. So in this example, you would be able to move no more than $56,614 from personal services. Or if you needed to move funds from operating, you would be able to move no more than $20,718. And then one other thing that I want to point out is up in, I'm using my cursor, but this will show you when your last 201 was received. Any questions about the budget summary report before I move on to modifications?
Hi, Nicole. We do have a few questions that are coming up right now. There's been discussion in the chat about difficulty finding candidates to fill the roles that were written into the summary. I see that El Dorado, Napa, San Mateo, and San Joaquin Ventura counties are all having challenges in this area. And we have a question from Selena asking if you could charge for job postings to AT.
Yes, absolutely. That can be an operating expense. Yes. And then also, if you are having challenges hiring a therapist, you may contract for one. You just have to make sure that you are following the contract and procurement procedures in the subrecipient handbook. And that position would be in operating expenses. But yes, job postings or anything related to hiring staff that is providing direct services to children. So if you do live scans upon hiring, that may be allocated to your budget. So whatever is involved in that person coming on board and providing services is an allowable expense. So thank you for asking that.
And there is a follow-up asking if there's any type of educational requirements. The comment is they recall years ago, chat required it to be a postgraduate associate.
Yes, so there are still requirements, and that is still one of the requirements. There's supervision requirements, and all of that is outlined in the RFA. Any other questions?
Yes, the last question that we have is from Brittany, who's in San Diego. She's asking, is there a specific way we need to be documenting or proving victimizations we use in OFDOT? But I wasn't sure if there's a Cal OES form we should be using.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. Is there a specific way we need to be documenting or proving victimizations we use in OFDOT? But I wasn't sure if there was a Cal OES form we should be using.
So I don't know if this is in reference to quantifying for the quarterly PMT reporting that is required, but there is quarterly reporting that is required. And you do need to track all of that victimization and the information about the victims on a monthly basis and then report it on a quarterly basis. If you don't have a way to track that, the OVC PMT reporting tool does have a tool on the website that has a spreadsheet where you can track all of that information. So then you track it.
sorry, this is Brittany, and maybe I can clarify a little bit.
Okay.
We do have a way to track it, and we do report it quarterly. I just didn't know if there was like a specific form we should be using, asking, caregivers or children of their victimization status.
No,
Something-
whatever works for you is fine. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for clarifying. Great questions. What else? No other questions? Are we ready to move on?
I have one more question, Nicole.
Sure.
I think I know the answer, but I just want to clarify, can volunteer therapist trainees, can we use their hours on for the match?
Yes, absolutely.
We can, okay. I previously had been told that we can't because you could only count postgraduate therapy hours, but it sounds like we can. So
Yes, you can. Any volunteer who is providing any type of service, I mean, even if they're doing some filing or if they are greeting people as they come in, all of that can be counted. That's why when you include volunteers on your budget, why we also need to know what they're doing. We just have to make sure that whatever they're volunteering to do is allowable by the program. Thanks for the thumbs up. Anything else before we move on to budget modifications? Okay, I'm going to move on. If anybody comes up with anything, feel free to ask. Okay, so budget modifications, if you joined us for the last meeting, this is going to be a little bit of a repeat, but this is important information. So budget modifications can be submitted as often as necessary. I heard a rumor that you were limited to 2. That is not true. You can submit them as often as you need to. So, and there are specific reasons why you would have to submit a budget modification. And I have that on this slide here. So if you need to add a line item that you did not anticipate initially when you submitted your budget with your application, you would need to do a budget modification to add that line item. As we already talked about, if you need to move funds from one budget category to another, you would have to do a budget modification. If you need to reallocate funds from one line item to another within that same budget category and it exceeds 20%, you need to do a budget modification. And then match, if you are meeting match and you did not request a match waiver and you need to change the way in which you are meeting match, you would have to do a budget modification. So if you had anticipated meeting all of your match with volunteers, but you did not get the hours that you needed, you can absolutely revise your budget to meet it in another way. For example, you may purchase supplies for the programs and use that as cash match, or if somebody donated items as in-kind match, such as comfort items that have been donated, you would have to do a budget modification for that. And then finally, for indirect costs, if there is going to be a change in indirect costs. So if you're claiming a 10% de minimis, which is the standard, and you have applied for and have been approved for a federally approved rate, then you would have to submit a budget modification to change that indirect cost. Or if you are renewing your federally approved rate and it changes, then you would have to do a budget modification. Any questions about doing a modification before I move on to the next question that was submitted? All right. So the next question asked was, what types of programs are funded and what types of services can be provided. So the types of programs within victim services are typically specific to victim-specific populations. So, for example, in my unit, all programs are specific to providing services to child victims. So, in addition to the child abuse treatment program, we also have court-appointed special advocates. We have a child sexual abuse treatment program, and then we also have various training programs that provide training to child abuse service providers. So that's my unit. But in addition to the children's unit, we also have other units that serve domestic violence victims, victims of sexual abuse, trafficked victims, underserved victims. And then the types of services that are allowed depends on, number one, the program, and then also the fund source for that program. This felt like a really broad question, and I don't know if I have fully answered it, but I did want to provide a resource that we have. We have on our website a publication that we put out every single year, usually within the first quarter, and that is the Joint Legislative Budget Committee Report, the JLBC. And this has all of the programs that we provide, a description of the programs, and then it also provides the funding sources, the funding amounts, and we also list the subrecipients. So all of you are in that report. So on this slide, I do have some screenshots. Over here is a screenshot of the navigation pane on the right side of the grants management website, and where you can find it under victim services and then under handbooks, reports, and publications. That is also where you would find the subrecipient handbook, also another very important resource for you. And then this is just the cover of this year's JLBC report. Any questions before we move on? And did I answer that question the way the person asking it had intended?
I have a question, actually. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry, I have like a weird echo on my end. So I'm going to do the best that I can. My name is Krista. I'm with Child and Family Center. And we, just because somebody asked this question, you know, of what type of services are covered, and we obviously have the AT grant, and we do mental health services, case management services. But one thing that we've realized as we're starting to get more clients is we have some additional services like behavioral support that comes into the home for the children, and some of those things that we didn't initially include in our proposal. And I'm wondering, you know, we included some of the things, but as we see additional services that us as an agency are able to provide to the child, do we have to send in like another budget modification or approval to include those services, or would we be able to include those services and just have to find a way to categorize it as something? How could we address those things?
So I would say that if it was not on your original budget, you would definitely have to do a modification to include those activities. So maybe it is somebody that is already on the budget, but they're doing these additional supportive services that you did not initially anticipate. Maybe it's increasing the amount of time that they're spending on their grant. Then you would want to do a budget modification. And you would also probably just want to talk to your program specialist to make sure that those activities are allowable. Most things are allowable if it's supporting the victim. But you also know that on your on your budgets that you also provide just a brief description of what each of those staff members are doing. And that's so that we can ensure that those activities are allowable through the funding and through the grant, which is really, really important.
Right. And when you're saying the staff, it's like the clinician, that it doesn't have to be like a specific staff's name, right?
Correct. Yes. As a matter of
Okay.
fact, it's preferable that you put a position rather than
Right.
a name. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, because these services definitely do support the child. So I'll just give an example. They've experienced, sexual assault, or they're a direct victim of the domestic violence in the home, and now their behaviors like transitioning into school, or some of those aggressive behaviors are going out. So we have like behavioral assistants. We have a behavioral team, they're called TBS teams. So, they can go into the home, they can, or, we have a couple different programs, but I'm just going to use TBS as an example. So they can go into the home, help the parent, help the child and the parent together, help them transition into school and teaching them some skills, things like that.
Yes.
So some of those things initially weren't included in depth of how much of the team. So we generalized it, but now that we're seeing the need is more in depth and like a more team and more people involved, then we were wondering kind of how we would address that.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds fantastic. So I think that if it is an increase in the amount of time that they're spending on the grant, if it's more than a 20% increase, then certainly you would want to do a budget modification for that.
Okay.
And then I would just suggest that when you submit your budget modification and your budget, that you just include a little more detail about those additional activities. But that sounds fantastic. I think it's great that you are able to get into the program and then identify maybe some additional needs that support these families, and are able to switch gears a little bit and include that. So thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What other questions do you have? All right, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, I alluded to this in the beginning. There is a question about, is there an option to run a caregiver vicarious trauma group to help the family heal from the impact of trauma? So yes, family and caregivers can be included in therapy to address the child victim's trauma and help in their recovery. So as I mentioned earlier, if through this process you identify that you have maybe the adult in the family who has their own trauma that needs to be addressed, that does have to be addressed through another fund source, another program, or it has to be referred out. This program can only provide therapy services to children. So if there's a sibling and you uncover that they have trauma, you may also provide therapy services to that sibling. So again, when we're talking about the caregivers in particular, whatever services or therapy is provided, it is to help in the recovery of that child's trauma. Now, and I think this is the nature of this question, is I have seen on some budgets and in some narratives where there are peer support groups for family members and caregivers, so that they know how to appropriately interact with their child in order to help their child recover from trauma. And that is something that is allowable.
Nicole, can you clarify? So we can provide the service to the adults?
Yes, so
as
long as
report their age on the PMTs and the first report and everything like that?
Yeah, I know this is where it gets really tricky for the PMT reporting, right? Because it's a child program, and then we would expect when you're providing those statistics to see nothing really over the age of 18. But I would say that if you are serving adults, or if you're including them in the child's therapy, that you just use those notes. And I'm sure your program specialist has mentioned using the notes field so that you can clarify. So if there's anything that looks a little bit different than would be anticipated for that reporting, or if there's something that commonly comes up as a question, I would say to add that as a note on your report. Does that help?
Yes, I have another question. Because typically I'm thinking of previous reports and for each quarter, and we only report numbers for the minors basically, but I'm thinking of a family that I'm serving, 3 children and an adult. So should I add the, over 18 person, which will be that parent, to our total numbers, and just add that note in those cases?
Yes, I would. I would just state that the adult was included in the family therapy.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you.
again, the therapy is not specific to addressing that adult's trauma. That has to be referred out or through another fund source or program.
Hey, Nicole, it's Nikisha. So because this question does come up often, and what I've instructed my subrecipients to do is report them based on including the demographics for the child's age, but add the notes or add a comment. So are we saying now that they can include that the adult age group?
Well, I would say that we probably should have it as accurate as possible in terms of the demographics. So, and I see where you're going with that, Nikisha, right? Because we don't expect to see over 18 necessarily on a report for a program that provides services to children. But as we are including more and more family members, caregivers, adults, that we probably should be more specific and accurate with those demographics, and then just adding a note about it.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Game changer. I'm going to send that email out.
Everybody, be prepared to hear from Nikisha and probably the rest of my team.
Nicole, I also think I recall from the RFP that services to siblings and families were required. And so we set up our electronic health record to count those as part of the family treatment. So yeah,
absolutely.
That's okay. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hi, I'm sorry. Can I ask another question within that? When it comes to the PMTs. So I'm hearing you say we can include that in the demographics, but when they're asking new individuals, are we including that caregiver parent as part of that new individual, or are we just including the number of children? Because I will say this, when we do the intake, we're meeting with the caregiver parent, we're discussing what the case is, what the needs of the child are. And because, there may be additional needs, we're also giving referrals to the parents. So we're doing this whole child, kind of whole family support. And so in the past, what we've just reported are the kids as the new clients and not the parents, and only the kids in the demographics. But now if we're going to also be assisting the parent, including the number of the parents that we assist, would that also be part of that?
That's a really good question. And I think what I will do is I'm making a note of your question, and I will talk to our federal funds administrator, who is the expert on the PMT, to find out what we should do on that. I think no matter what we do, we need to be consistent. And yes, you do make a really good point, right? Because maybe they're not being included in the therapy, but they are getting referred to something. And that is actually one of the things that you report on in the PMT. So let me get some clarification on that specifically. And then I don't know, maybe I could send that out to Melissa and then she can send an email to all of you with that response.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, thank you. I like budget summary reports, but I am not a fan of PMT. We have to do it, but that is, whew, that's a lot of work. I get it.
If I could ask a question, please.
Absolutely.
We have a couple of families where the children have been kind of they're running away. And the parents are have concerns about the children being groomed for trafficking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we engage the kiddos in therapy, but then sometimes they run away again during the session, as we're, engaging in therapy. And we wanted to know, is it okay, because we're trying to prepare the parents for how to help the child when and if they return. Is it acceptable to continue therapy with the parents and or siblings, even if the
Absolutely
child is not engaged?
Yes, because that reunification is going to be really important, right? For, again, helping that child recover, and then in being consistent with the therapy, and then maybe preventing them from leaving again, right? So absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions. Any other before I move on to the next question? Okay, so the next question I received was, is it acceptable to completely change your plan? So I don't really know the context of this question. So I do want to start off by saying that we would need to understand the extent and the reason for the proposed change and what that change is. And I just want to remind everybody that your proposal was selected through the competitive process. So we need to be mindful that you were selected because your proposal demonstrated your ability to carry out the objectives of the program. So what I would say is to start out by having a discussion with your program specialist about the details. Any changes that are made to the goals, objectives, or activities do require a modification form. And then with that, you would also have to include an updated budget and a new narrative to describe what those changes are. So again, I don't really know the context. I don't know, if this is what we previously talked about, where you start the program and then you realize that there's more that you can do. Absolutely, that is acceptable. We already talked about that. You can add it to your budget. You can do a modification to include those activities.
That question came from me, from San Joaquin, and it was because we were struggling, like so many of the other jurisdictions, in finding a clinician.
Yes.
And so for a while, we were really, really struggling to even, be able to get kiddos into therapy, but it ended up working out since the time that I submitted that question. So
good. Well, that's a great
turn of
event.
They were able to absorb some of the clinical services with the partner agency. So thank you.
Fantastic. Absolutely. So I'm now kind of understanding the context of that question. I do want to add that, again, going back to, if you are having a hard time hiring a therapist, and I know it happens, I mean, especially in today's world, I would say that if you need to, again, contract with somebody until you hire somebody, absolutely. And that's not necessarily a major change in your plan. You're still providing those therapeutic services. It's just not with your own staff. It is with somebody who you are contracting with. Just follow the contract and procurement process outlined in the subrecipient handbook, and you will have to do a budget modification to reallocate those funds from personnel services over to operating. But absolutely, that's a great way to continue seeing those children and a great way to continue to use those funds. Okay, so the next question was about the Grant Sub Award number. This question specifically was, why can't the grant year match the grant number now that Cal OES switched to a calendar year? So this is a very fair question. There was a time when the AT program was October through September. And then we also had the XT program, which started several months after the original AT program. That XT program had a different performance period that began in January and ended in December. So then a couple of years ago, we extended the performance period of the AT program so that it was October through December of the following year, 15-month grant subaward performance period. And we did that so that we could sync it up to the XT program and essentially consolidate the two programs together. So, excuse me, now this program does start on a calendar year, as you noted, but that does not actually affect the subaward number. So this slide is a breakdown of the subaward number. So obviously AT is the 2-letter code for the child abuse treatment program. Every program has a 2-letter code. The first 2 numbers represent the state fiscal year in which funds are awarded. So we are in the 2021 state fiscal year. The state fiscal year begins July 1st. So July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022 is the state fiscal year 21. So therefore, the first 2 numbers for the upcoming performance period is 21. I know it's confusing because it's going to be 22, but we're using 21, but that's the reason why, because it has to do with the state fiscal year. I know myself, I have to stop and think about it a few times when I'm talking about calendar year versus state fiscal year. But that's the reason why those numbers are going to be 21 instead of 22. And then the next 2 numbers represent the number of years that you have received funds through the program following the RFP. So even if you had the program in years prior, we start over once we fund you through the competitive process. And then the last 4 numbers are those numbers that are assigned to you. They follow you year after year. And if you have multiple grants, it will always be the same. So that is why the number is the number. So does anybody have any other questions about the program? Next up, we are going to talk about money. All right. So let's see. So actually there was one other program question. I'm sorry, I think somebody was—
Can I ask a question about training?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so in the past, we've been required to hold the 40 hours of child abuse related training in person, but then COVID, everything was online.
Yeah.
But things aren't necessarily very plentiful in person again. And
Yeah.
so can we continue with online child abuse related training?
Absolutely, yeah.
Perfect.
Yes, you may. Thank you for asking.
Can you expand on that requirement? I guess I was not aware of that requirement.
We don't actually mandate a specific number of hours. It's just that training is required for the staff who will interact with the child victims, and all of that is outlined in the RFA. But various topics like the mandated reporter training, domestic violence training, just different types of training so that your staff is equipped to work with child victims. And then of course, other training topics would be different therapeutic modalities. Okay. Okay, so the program question, the last program question, I believe, is, does Cal OES anticipate any changes to future application processes? So there are not any anticipated changes to the process. We recently made a change to the application submission, which is now electronic. So when we're talking about the non-competitive process, where you are submitting an application in order to continue the funding, once you have been selected through the competitive process, those all have to be sent electronically via email. I do have the email address up on this slide for your reference. That is also referenced in the RFA when we release it. So you no longer have to mail that in. We are actually updating our process for submitting proposal electronically as well. So the RFP is our competitive process, and there was a time when you had to submit an original and 2 copies, but we are actually updating our process so those can all be submitted electronically as well. And then, you know, anytime those updates are made, that is always posted in the RFA or the RFP. So it's always really important to pay attention to the submission requirements so that you are submitting it correctly. This is particularly important when we're talking about an RFP. We have a little more flexibility with our RFAs, with our application submission, but the proposal submission, we are not flexible. And then I think also with the RFP, we may allow for hand delivery, but we're still ironing out those details. But other than that, we do not anticipate any other changes. I'm pretty sure all of you are aware that we no longer require a wet signature. We allow for electronic signatures. We allow for scanned documents, obviously. So those are some of the big changes that we have implemented recently. Some of the wet signature changes occurred because of COVID. Up until last year, we still required a wet signature on the 201 and several of the application documents. So everything electronic, as long as it looks like a signature, you can use PDF, you can use DocuSign. It just cannot be a printed signature.
Last question, if you don't mind.
Of course.
We have a facility dog at our Family Justice Center who, you know, greets folks when they come in, and if the children want the dog to in the therapy session, the dog will go in. I just wanted to make sure that our resources that we need for the dog, veterinarian visits, stuff like that, can that be covered under the chat grant?
Of course it can. Yes, I think therapy dogs are so great. And I would say, so you could actually purchase a therapy dog with your program. You can pay the salary of a handler, as you mentioned, vet bills and anything else that goes along with that therapy dog. But I would say that if that therapy dog is used for other programs, it should be prorated accordingly to the chat program. Just like anything else that is an operating expense or a human resource expense, should just be allocated to the program according to how much it's used for the chat program.
Thank you very much.
Nicole, I have another question. It was in the chat, but maybe I'll ask it aloud. I was curious, any feedback on historical reports for child abuse and how other programs might be dealing with that. So is everybody understanding, you know, the law as I am, that all historical reports of abuse need to be re-reported? And how are you handling that? Because it just feels like we're reporting constantly. And this is a child abuse treatment program, so we're going to hear it all. So any feedback would be great.
So can you clarify what type of reporting you're referring to? You're not You're not referring,
Child abuse mandated reporting.
yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So I think that that is a good question for the group. As a matter of fact, I think that is one of the questions that had been submitted in advance, that we're going to take time to let all of you share ideas and information.
Okay, so that's in the works, because yeah, I actually submitted it last time there was this this group together, but we're really kind of struggling, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the law correctly and all of that. So
Yes, so
if I may answer that, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and also through the Board of Behavioral Sciences, as a mandated reporter, we are to always submit the historical abuse and then allow, child welfare or Department of Family Services do the investigation. But just by law, by our licensure, we are mandated to report it, even if it happened historically. It would be child welfare or, their child protective services, their job to go and do the investigation on those cases.
thank you.
This is Manisha. I used to be a child welfare social worker and a manager, so I agree with that we have to, as a mandated reporter now working in nonprofit, that to provide that mandated report, and then that's not our responsibility to determine that if it really happened or not, and then CFS does what they need to do.
Thank you. Brittany, I think that was you who had asked.
Yep.
Comment, and does that help?
Yeah, sounds like just have to keep sometimes re-traumatizing families, and that, but that is the nature of it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, are we ready to move on to some of your fiscal questions, the all important money questions? Oh, I think I advanced way too far.
One thing I'll add to that, that last conversation, I mean, sometimes we've called and said, did you get a report of this already? You need us to report, and they may say no. And so you don't have to, give this long whole story and make you feel like you're re-traumatizing the family because it's already been reported. You're just doing your due diligence to confirm that it's been reported. So in my experience, at least our county, if it's a 5-year-old case and they've already documented it within the last 5 years, they're often not going to do anything unless the child is in current harm or something like that.
My understanding is that anytime, even if it's historical information, it's always good to be safe and to report it again, and whether they do it or not, document it, saying, received a call on a, historical case or something. So they keep track of that. And just in case sometime that happens, is that even with 5 historical mandated reports, that something else new develops, that it's beneficial for the child when and if the case goes to court. So then they track that, how many calls came in, what happened, what was done or not.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great. So this is also part of the intent of having these meetings so that you can share information like this with one another. And we will have time for more sharing in just a few more slides. And then also, I just want to note, I'm not good enough to run a PowerPoint talk and read chat. So if you have a question, please unmute yourself and feel free to ask me a question. So I apologize if you have put a question in the chat box for me, but as I said, I'm not that good. So, okay, so fiscal questions. Somebody had asked about match waivers. So what are acceptable reasons and deadlines for submitting match waivers? Thank you for that question. So all VOCA funded programs like the AT program do have the option of requesting a match waiver, and the instructions, including the due date, are always going to be noted in the RFA or the RFP. This will be your only chance to request a match waiver. You are not penalized when you request a match waiver. So when you are making a determination about whether or not you can meet match, you really need to think realistically about whether or not you can, and whether or not you, and if you don't think you can, then you should submit a match waiver. The last thing that we want to do at the end of a performance period, if you have not met your match, is send you an invoice, because that will happen if you spend more funds and not enough of your match. So when you complete the match waiver request, you should state the practical and or logistical obstacles to providing that match, as well as the local resource constraints that will prohibit you from meeting match. We will accept any reasonable justification. I personally have never denied a match waiver. I have returned them to get more clarification if one or both of the justifications do not make sense or really address those obstacles or constraints, but I've never denied one. However, now that we are in the process, I should say, this is going to tie in with COVID. So we are in the process of updating our match waiver policy because the Office for Victims of Crime, which is the source of our VOCA funds, has implemented a policy that allows us to approve match waiver requests due to the pandemic. So all you have to do on future match waiver requests for the VOCA funds is state that you cannot meet the match due to the pandemic. And we actually expect this to be a reasonable justification for a match waiver for 12 months following the end of the declared national emergency. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. But yes, you can request a match waiver. You're not penalized. If you have doubts about your ability to meet it, you're just better off requesting it. And please just make sure that you're following those dates in the RFP or RFA. Okay, so the next question was, how do I allocate funds by budget period? And I actually have 2 slides to address this question. So as you are aware, when we released the RFA, we used 2 fund sources. We had the 2019 VOCA and the 2020 VOCA. So you worked really hard on putting those budgets together, and then you were contacted by your program specialist asking you to revise your budget because the funding changed. So in response to a potential reduction of VOCA funding, we actually received some state funding, which is the 2021 VCGF. So what we did is we reduced the 2020 VOCA and allocated the VCGF to supplement that. So now you have the 2021 VCGF, you have the 2019 VOCA, and you have the 2020 VOCA. Now, when we asked you to change your budget and we did the new allocations, the overall funding did not change, just the amounts to each of those fund sources. So those are your fund sources. So when you are allocating across your fund sources, there are several things that you need to consider. When you allocate a line item to both state funds and federal funds, to avoid supplanting, you are supposed to use your state funds before you start claiming your federal funds. And again, that is if you allocate both of those fund sources to the same line item. You will also need to consider any special condition notices that may be on your grant. And on this slide, I do have an example of a special condition notice that will be included with your grant subaward approval. The VOCA funds, again, I said, are available for 3 years for us to allocate. So 2019 VOCA is currently available through just part of 2020, which results in a special condition notice for your grant subaward. So this looks just like what you will receive with your notice, as I said. And what it is saying is that you have to expend that 2019 VOCA by July 31st, 2022, and then submit your 201 claiming those funds no later than August 31st, 2022. And then this gives us time to approve your payment request and make that payment to you before we have to reconcile our own expenditures and close out our award by the due date set by the Office for Victims of Crime. And then finally, when you receive multiple fund sources, or I should say fund years, so in this case, the 2019 VOCA and the 2020 VOCA, you have to expend what we call the older funds first, even if those older funds do not have a special condition notice. Now, with all of that being said, we were recently given the option to request a 1-year extension for the 2019 VOCA, and it is our intent to do that. So if and when we are approved, that means that we will be able to lift that special condition notice, and you will be able to use that 2019 VOCA for the duration of your grant subaward. So if we are able to lift that special condition notice, you will be able to use that 19 VOCA beyond July. You would actually be able to use it through the end of your performance period. So with all of that said, again, you would need to expend those state funds first. If they are on the same line item as the federal funds, then you want to expend your 19 VOCA and then your 20 VOCA. You could put all 3 of those fund sources on one line item if you want. Now, your program specialist, when we first asked you to redo your budget, may have told you not to do that. But that was before we knew that we were potentially going to lift a special condition notice. So once we found out that we were going to request an extension, we just accepted the allocations the way that you had submitted it, because I know that was a little bit of a feat. So hopefully we'll get that at the beginning of the year. So we'll let you know just as soon as we have more information on that. And then finally are some questions about spend down ideas. So, and then I also just want to open this up for everybody, but here I have a few suggestions for you. I know we've already talked about a few other things as well, but you know, any type of therapeutic tools, sand trays and accessories, games, toys that enhance the therapeutic experience and outcome for children. I have seen outdoor furniture on a budget, and we have approved that for outside waiting areas. And this was in response to COVID and being able to do some social distancing. In addition, you could reconfigure your space to accommodate social distancing. Now, I know that the rule is you're not allowed to do any construction, but when we're talking about reconfiguring, we can allow that. If you're unsure of what exactly that means and you have some ideas for what you want to do, please contact your program specialist to discuss. Another great way to spend down your money would be to replace furniture in your waiting rooms and therapy rooms, either because you need a refresh to create a pleasant, soothing space for your child victims, or maybe you want to replace it with furniture that is more durable and can stand up to regular sanitizing, right? I mean, you may have some furniture that is not easily, that you can easily sanitize. You know, you can put area rugs down to make it more calm and pleasant, paintings on the walls, whatever it takes to create a friendly and soothing environment for your child victims. Air purifiers is another option for you to keep the environment healthy. White noise machines that can be used outside or within therapy rooms to create more privacy and possibly eliminate outside distractions. So those are just some ideas that we threw together for you. But I'd like to open it up to everybody else to see if they have any ideas or things that they have included on their budget that has been particularly helpful.
I don't think we include this in our budget. I think we paid it from a different grant, but there are some online Suntrace program available. And I think it's like 100 something per year per account. So that's another way I'm thinking we can use it. We can do the spend down. I found it helpful. There are online Suntrace for free, but that one is more interactive. The kids can add water, and everything is like 3D, so they can move around the tray and all of that. So yeah, that's one of the ideas I have.
That sounds like really cool technology. Thank you for sharing. What other ideas or suggestions have you all come up with that you would like to share?
We added a fish tank.
Oh, great idea. Okay,
I can share
I
as
like
well.
that.
In Riverside County, we didn't do this with our AT grant, but we've done it with another funding source. And what we did is we curated like a specific wish list of just therapy books that are related to kids.
Yes.
So we put together like a library on books related to grief, related to sexual abuse, and other just important topics that we know our kids and parents need.
Great.
And we purchased them in English and Spanish so that we would have some variety. And then what we did is we also used our funds to be able to put together like self-care kits for the kids. So we were able to buy like just a curated bag of like sensory objects, aromatherapy objects, and stuff like that to help teach them about self-care.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
I have a quick question about spending. I know in the RFA where we can pay for transportation for families. Is it acceptable to purchase like a gift card for that or like for an Uber or something instead of having to just pay each time for it?
Yes. Okay, so thank you for bringing that up. So yes, absolutely. I think that gift cards are a great way to spend some funds. Just make sure that you are keeping track of them, and you know that you know, if the gift cards are a little more general, that they understand what they are to be used for. And I would just say to make sure that you're keeping those gift cards at a minimal dollar amount so that you don't get spent on other things that would not be allowable through the program. But absolutely, I've seen bus tokens, gift cards, payments for, you know, ride share. All of that would be totally acceptable and helps remove barriers to getting therapy. And then also, if they need transportation services to address any court-related issues as well. And then also the other thing that I want to point out is that you could also do, oh my gosh, why is the name escaping me right now? You could do a little bit of cash, but there is more information in the subrecipient handbook. So if you have a family that comes in and they might have some immediate needs that require some cash, you know, they need to go pick up some pajamas or toothbrush or something to that effect, just small and petty cash is what I was thinking of. So if you want to do a little bit of petty cash, you could certainly do that. You are limited to 2% of your overall budget. And you do have to have a policy and tracking in place for that. And there's more information in the subrecipient handbook on that. Other suggestions, ideas, questions? Are we ready to open it up to some of these networking questions? Melissa, are we running out of time?
Yes, I was just going to bring that to your attention. We are at time and we do have some questions about where questions will be answered if they aren't able to be covered today. We won't be moving into breakout rooms just because of the short time. But if you'd like to advance to your network questions slide, that would be helpful just so that everyone on the call can see what other folks are hoping to learn from the network. I did want to lift up some of the questions that were coming in the chat in these last couple minutes, just since I do not want that to go missed. I know that there was discussion earlier around challenges with enrolling children in services when there are consent issues with a legal guardian or parents that have custody rights. So if that's something you'd like to provide feedback or commentary on, Nicole, we welcome that, as well as anyone else that is experiencing this. Now would be the time to cover this, just since I don't want the session to end without addressing it, since I know that's something that I was asked to circle back on.
So I think that would better be answered by the field. So if any of you have any suggestions or ideas that you have used to address consent issues.
Do you think, Nicole, it's a good idea for us recipients to have a meeting just kind of discuss this, especially the modalities, recruitment strategies, so we actually strengthen our relationship, so we can just also vent out and then, talk about our frustrations, that what's working, what's not working, what are the barriers, and as a team saying that, oh, these are some of the good things that we need to discuss it next time, bring it up.
Yes. So. Absolutely. And I think that was also part of the intent for today, but obviously we went way longer than we had anticipated in this portion. So absolutely. And really, this is about you. So we really want to know what it is that you want to talk about. What do you want to know about? What would be useful for you? We want to make this something that you're engaged in and something that you find value in. So absolutely.
Thank you. So we'll just pull the email addresses from Melissa's invite and then send out maybe doodle poll saying what is the best time so we can start having maybe regular meetings. Just kind of create our support group on that.
Absolutely, yes. I love that idea, and I would really like the momentum to continue because I think that it is helpful for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manisha. I see that we are at time, so I do want to be respectful. I know we started a few minutes late, but I want to thank you all for joining us for Let's Chat and for being present and asking our questions of Nicole related to both fiscal and program questions. Those network questions that you saw are definitely going to be available, and we do want to turn the conversation over to you all so that you're able to learn from each other and really spark that innovation and inspiration, especially as you enter the next grant year. So I want to thank you all for being present. Part 2 will be available coming in the new year, so please stay tuned, and we are so excited to welcome you then. So thank you all for being here and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.